Okay, so what are we going to cover? So I decided to limit quick brewing, because quick brewing can be a number of different things. I decided to limit it to pretty much 2 specific things and then a couple subcategories underneath. So the first one is extract brewing. So I know extract brewing is really old school, but you can still brew some really good stuff with it. And we've got 2 examples of that. We're going to be doing extract with grains and then what I refer to as straight old school extract brewing. And then we're going to be talking about all-in-one systems. So we've got 2 examples. We've got the Grainfather, and then we've got the BrewZilla. And of the BrewZilla, there's actually 2 different versions that we're going to talk about on that. So we got quite a bit to cover. So let's dive right into the first thing. The way we're going to structure this presentation is we're going to be doing it in a Q&A format. So what I did was I sent out these 5 questions to my volunteers. They responded back with their answers. So when we get to the sections, we're going to ask these questions, just kind of free-form it. So if you guys have any questions that need to be asked during this or any points of clarification or anything, go ahead and chime up at that time, and we'll talk about it. I want this to kind of not be structured, so it's going to be a lot of just kind of open discussion on a lot of these points. So the 5 different questions that I sent out to all of my volunteers were, what made you choose this method? What are some of the pros? What are some of the issues that you've had? Any complaints or things that you wish were different? And then the last question was, if you had to purchase again or continue to do this method, would you choose something else or would you continue with this? So let's start talking about extract with grain brewing. And this would be Lauren and Judy. And there, of course, is a pink flamingo, just because there has to be with these guys.
Well, the first thing that happens when we're doing extract with grain, or actually any brew session, is we turn on the brewing light. And that's important, so there you go.
So they're going to be passing around their Polynesian Pilsner.
Or a version thereof.
Or a version thereof. And then I'm going to be passing around an example of old school extract brewing. And this is called the Chief, and it's an Irish stout. If I can get another volunteer to help pour. Sean, you volunteered. So in there, there's 2 brown bottles marked with TC. So let's talk about Lauren and how you do your extract with grain. Go ahead, yeah.
So the question is why? Why would I do that? Why extract brewing? The main reason is to minimize the brewing time and complexity and initial investment, but mainly it's about time, because it's pretty darn quick. There's minimal equipment investment. It's also, like we talked about earlier when we gave away the brewing homebrew basic starter kit. It's a good starting point for beginning brewers because there's not a huge investment. The other thing that I still really like about it is our ability to brew in the kitchen multiple batches and or multiple recipes basically simultaneously. As long as you have 2 brew kettles to boil stuff in, you don't need any extra equipment to brew back-to-back, basically simultaneously, 2 5-gallon batches at the same time. Or at least it works for us. Questions or comments?
John?
That one. The question is, have I ever had a boil-over in the kitchen? The answer is yes. And the follow-up question is, am I still allowed to brew in the kitchen? And the answer is yes. No, she did know about it. But you know what? We're supposed to both be keeping an eye on it, and I'm not the only brewer in the house. So what are some of the pros for brewing extract with grain? Simple brew day, fewer steps, less cleanup. Less preparatory cleanup and less cleanup afterwards. Much less grain disposal hassle, if that's a hassle for people. I have never had a stuck mash. I'm just saying. Yeah, and again, equipment cost savings. One other thing is a fairly predictable control on gravity and ABV, even the first time on a recipe. You pretty much know what you're going to get by what you're putting in if you're using liquid or dry malt extract, LME or DME. And you can control it by the way that you, at least the way that we brew. We don't brew a full 5 gallons when we're boiling in the kitchen. We basically water it down, or we add to get to the 5-gallon level. So there's quite a bit of control there. The next question is, what are some of the issues that we've had? Oh, look, there's our sparge.
Yeah, your videos are playing.
That's my sparge. We pulled that grain bag out of the boil kettle and got 170-degree water coming out of the tea kettle and pouring across the grain bag. That's the sparge. It's so complicated. What are some of the issues we've had? Less fine control over recipe formulation due to the limited base fermentable ingredients. So you only have so many LMEs and DMEs that you can get at your local homebrew shop. And so that's why you have extract with grain to add some complexity with the grains that were in that steeping bag as part of the front end of that process. One of the other negatives that we've run across is lack of consistency and availability of base ingredients, especially from supplier to supplier. There's a lot of different things that the homebrew shops can have in stock for you. Some I have had issues with, well, I want liquid malt extract and they don't have anything light enough, so I got to go with DME instead, dry malt extract. Some of the suppliers don't take care of their liquid malt extract really well, and it might come in oxidized to you if they've had something that's been open for a while and they didn't have on CO2. Has anybody else had issues with that from their suppliers?
Well, let's take a show of hands. How many people have recently brewed with extracts? With straight extracts, nothing fancy.
Yeah,
so we've got a couple. So.
Me and Stan and Jim. Very good.
And I just did for the presentation.
And you
so,
did,
yeah.
all 4 of us.
But
Nicely done.
one of the things that we're trying to show is that, a lot of us will think of this as a really old school method, and in fact it is. But sometimes it's good to get back to basics, especially if you need, if you need kind of just to reset your perception of things. This is a good way to do it. But as Lauren said, sometimes getting good, reliable ingredients is an issue, and you're not going to have the availability that you're going to have of different things like, you could have, different types of grain. You're limited to whatever LME or DME you get. So it does kind of restrict you a bit more than doing an all grain session.
Yeah. So you don't want to do something super fancy, but
no, but if you need beer and a quick turnaround, and you need, I guess if you need beer and a quick turnaround, that's its own problem altogether. But you can brew something that is really good and really drinkable, and it's a good, as I said, kind of a good way to recenter yourself.
So the beer that we sent around was based on our Polynesian Pilsner recipe, which has always been extract with grain. Starts with basically a light Pilsner liquid malt extract with a few other grains. Got a pound on a 5-gallon batch. We got a pound of Carapils and a little bit of wheat. It's called Polynesian Pilsner because we don't use a Pilsner yeast. We go with a Kolsch yeast to give it a little bit more character, fruitiness, sort of a Polynesian themed thing. So this particular, and it's always been all Saaz hops. That's the basic the base recipe that we started with. This particular version does not have Saaz hops. It has Sterling hops. Pardon? What was that comment? He said, "Oh no." Well, You can tell me what you think about that substitution. The other thing that we ended up with that was a bit of a surprise was way darker than a Pilsner, right? And I think it was because, going back to that question about liquid malt extract that's been sitting around for a little while, I have a feeling that's where that came from, some oxidized liquid malt extract. It sat in my garage for 3 months. I'm just saying. So it wasn't the supplier, but by the time I got around to using it, it had been sitting in a sealed bucket for 3 or 4 months. I'm getting some faces saying maybe I didn't do it. I don't know. It turned out way darker than it ever has before.
Yeah, so if you've got a question, stick your hand up. Since we've only got 2 mics and one of them is attached to my head, it's going to take a little to get a mic.
I just have
so.
a quick comment. So when I first started DME brewing, I could never get a light Pilsner color. And I was getting it from Home Brew Mart, which was going through a lot of DME or a liquid LME at the time. And then I'm like, it's like I wanted a light beer. I could never, ever get it. And so I was like, that's when I chose to go to all grain. And it was mainly just because of the color and that control.
Yeah, so our Polynesian Pilsner has never been as light and white or whatever as a normal Pilsner, but this one's a little extra dark. The other thing I think that happened with this, Stan, did you have a comment?
Question. Actually, 2 questions. So, which Kolsch yeast is your favorite one to use for this, and should you rename it to Polynesian Amber?
No, the answer is WOP 029 for Kolsch yeast. We've always used that. And yeah, we do need to rename it because it's not our Polynesian Pilsner anymore. It's something else. Yeah, Polynesian Amber, Polynesian. Actually, my preference is after tasting it, I don't know what anybody else gets, but I get some phenols. So I kind of thought that maybe it was appropriate that it's a, clove, phenol sort of thing. Holiday beer. It's a holiday Pilsner. It's for we brewed it for the holidays, for this and for another event, actually, so. It always is when I'm there. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the Sterling hops or if it's the combination of whatever happened with the LME or maybe fermentation temperature might have been generally a little bit higher than we've had in the past. He likes it as a holiday beer. That's great to hear. So we're calling it it's confusing. We haven't settled on it yet, so you might need to help us. It's a Holly Pilsner. It's a holiday Pilsner. It's a holiday. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I just hope. Polynesian holiday.
Holiday. There you go.
Hey, I like it. Thank you, Matt. Okay, that's all I got. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Lauren? Oh, yeah, Jim, sorry.
So back in the early 80s, the extract, all we got a little can, the hops were in it, and they give you a little package of dry yeast that you had to hydrate, and then you had to add a ton of sugar.
You're getting ahead of us, Jim.
And that was really fast. And then when I learned how to do all grains, that took forever. So this is a faster.
Yeah, I think we're going to get it. Yeah, some of those cans are pretty scary. Anyway.
All right, well, thank you, Lauren and Judy. So since Jim decided to play spoiler, let's talk about the Chief. So that's the second beer that went around. That's the one that I did. This is a no-boil batch. I just mixed, pitched, and fermented. So, normally I wouldn't have thought about doing that, but there is a homebrew shop out of Saskatchewan that I've been watching that does a lot of information on the BrewZilla, which we'll be talking about later. And they've been doing a couple batches like this. So basically, as Jim said, it is a batch of pre-hopped LME. So I went ahead and pitched that. Also added some DME and a crap ton of priming sugar. That's what I had. That's what I used. I didn't use the little pack of yeast that came on the top of it. I went ahead and put some Lallemand in there, some Nottingham. The thing took off like crazy and then stopped fairly quickly. It was supposed to get around to 10:07 and went to 10:09. So it did get where it was close to be, but not quite. So what does everybody think about it? This is a definitely non-traditional way to do it. I detect a lot of residual sweetness in there, which to me I don't necessarily care for. So I think I'd want it a little drier. But what does everybody else think? You say there's no hops in it at all?
No hops at all?
No, I'm sorry. It was a hopped can of LME. Pre-hop. So it like Jim was saying, it is the way old school method of doing it. Yeah, so I did not add any hops to it after that.
Okay.
So, yeah. Let's go to Andy, and then I'll go back to Louis.
So you were saying that you thought it was a little bit on the sweeter side. I think not because it didn't finish dry, but I think because the hop malt extract doesn't seem to have the bitterness. I think that you might be looking to counteract it. But if you didn't tell me it was a no boil, I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know it.
Yeah, and I was actually going to talk about it and then share the slide, and I did it in reverse because Jim spoiled everything. So
historically, in history, the reason for making beer, one of the reasons for making beer was because you could boil it, and because the water wasn't any good.
Yeah, at that point you needed to sterilize and clean
and
the water.
And so I'm assuming you didn't use swamp water or something like that.
Yeah, and I just ran it through a regular carbon filter.
Yeah,
so nothing special with it.
Yeah, that's a great idea for a real quick, ferment.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I wouldn't have considered it on my own if I hadn't watched the video from the guys in Canada. So we'll go back to Louis here.
I mean, I was going to say, basically, I second Andy's, what he said about it, about not knowing it was no boil, for one. But also, you said for you, it comes off as having a sweetness.
Yeah, there's a little bit more sweetness in there than I was expecting.
And, I would not have called it out if I was just having this blind. To me, it comes off as perfectly fine and dry, and dry enough anyway. But,
yeah, I think I calculated out at about 3.8, somewhere around there. So, which is kind of right where it should be. So it's not too far beyond.
I mean, maybe for the style, he said this is supposed to be an Irish style.
Yeah, Irish style.
Maybe a little bit, maybe not dry enough for an Irish style, but I don't know, not bad, honestly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you know what hops was used?
I don't remember what was written on the can. And with LME, you normally, soak it in a hot water bath so it kind of loosens up. At that point, the label just goes away. So I didn't think to note it.
So I can neither confirm nor deny this, but in Afghanistan, I acquired DME and used one of those water boiler things in my tent that we were living in. And I may or may not have heated up the water, added the DME, and then added the hops later, not really getting a lot of bitterness, but I may or may not have made a pale ale in Afghanistan using this same method, and it worked quite well. And we used the near beer bottles, and I bottled it in that, and it worked well.
You can't confirm or deny, but so one issue with this was, everything's cold, right? So trying to get the LME to integrate and trying to get the DME and the priming sugar to integrate was a problem. As I mentioned, the guys in Saskatchewan, what they would do is they basically had a big paddle that they'd attach to a drill so they could spin it real quick with their pouring everything in. I didn't have that, so I'm sitting there with a spoon trying not to bang into the side of my glass carboy and get everything integrated. So there were still a few chunks of DME that didn't integrate real well. But again, it was more of a proof of concept than anything. I wanted to be able to show that, yes, you could do it without even boiling. So if you really want to do a quick extract brew, it can be done. Now, let's talk about some tech. So let's get my Grainfather guys up here so we can get Derek and Kurt. And Kurt, you got your beer? All right, so let's get Kurt's beer going around. If we can get someone to help him. So unfortunately, you guys are going to need to share a microphone.
Hello. Here we have in all of its glory.
Yeah, so give us a second. We'll spin the camera around and get that up on the screen.
The Grainfather 30G, I believe, is the model. That's the 30-liter version, which I think is roughly 10 gallons.
Hang on, Lauren. Switch it back to the slides. Switch it back to the slides. I still got some slides to go through first. We'll do it during the slideshow. Hang on. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We got some information slides to go through before we start showing off the hardware. Hey, Kurt, do you want to get someone to help you with that?
Am I coming up right now?
Yeah, I'd like you to, yeah. You're going to have to share mics with Derek. Yeah. Yeah, yep. All right, so first let's talk about some of the specifications and features of the Grainfather for those of you that aren't familiar with it. So the Grainfather, this is for the basic, I guess I'm calling it entry-level Grainfather, the G30, right? Yeah, so this is the lower end. With both the Grainfather and the BrewZilla, there are variations above that to get you much greater volumes, but we're going with the lower ones as kind of a good baseline. So the entry-level one, we got an 8-gallon capacity, stainless steel body. There's Bluetooth control using a special app on your phone, so you can do some setup and stuff, and we'll talk about that later. There is a pump in the bottom, which is magnetically driven. It's got a grain basket where you can do up to a 20-pound grain bill, so you can do a fairly large beer with it. It also comes with a counterflow chiller, which is awesome. There is optional distilling capability, so there's add-ons and attachments that you can get to be able to distill. It comes in 110 volt or 120 volt options. There are definitely advantages to the 220 if you have 220 in your brewing area. And that's the same thing with the BrewZilla. If you've got just a regular 110 plug, it's probably going to take a little bit to heat up. So the Grainfather starts at about $700. As I said, there are add-ons and larger capacities that go beyond that price. And with all of these, there's also, used ones and stuff that you can pick up. But a brand new one starts at around $700. So let's go ahead and go over the questions with you guys, and then what we'll do is we'll spin the camera around and we can talk about some specific features. On the slides, we'll have some pictures of Kurt's Brew Day going through there. So the first question, what made the two of you choose the Grainfather? What was the reason you guys picked this particular vessel?
So I'm just going to back up a little bit and say that all the pictures you'll be seeing of mine are of a Grainfather G40,
okay,
which is the more recent. I know there's different versions of this. I don't know the details of it. I actually never used a G30, but I talked to a bunch of people who had G30s, and there were various things about the G40 that appealed to me. For one, it's got a 12-gallon capacity. Mine is 220 volts. You can actually get the lower voltage, but with the higher capacity, which is, I think, about 12 gallons total, it's not enough power to really drive that thing very fast, and so with 220 it really works nicely. It's Wi-Fi, is yours Wi-Fi? Yeah, so I believe they've come out with G40, with the G30 and Wi-Fi, which allows you to have a lot more flexibility in terms of communicating with your app on your phone. And in this case, there are a lot of differences. The the pump is inside the system. There's no pipe work involved. They've gotten rid of that. But it's basically the same concept. It's brew in a bag, effectively. It's brew in an insert mash tun. And it's got the same counterflow chiller, et cetera. There's details that are different. But so what made me do it? I was brewing on a 3-tier Blickman tower system with 3 levels of burners and 23-gallon pots and pumps and this and that. And to be honest, as I was aging and had had some back injuries, I decided I was just ruined by the time I ended a day and cleaned everything up and lifting pots off the upper tier of my system, et cetera. I was just ruined. So I needed to make things more accessible for me and easier to lift around. And so I went with this system. This is what you're looking at right there. You can see I've got it sitting in a little cart for a 30-gallon barrel. So I just bought one of these four-wheel barrel carts, and I dropped it into it, fit perfect. I have a 55-gallon barrel carrier with wheels. If anyone is interested, I'd like to give it away. If you need it for anything, talk to me. As you can see, what's floating through here are the program is running. It runs by itself. It's very simple. I can set up to have my water heated up to mash temperature, walk away for a while, grind my grains, etc., dump it in, and it just alerts me when I need to do the next step. And it's got recirculation, etc., etc., etc. So it just really simplified things for me, and the weight system, the weights issue was done away with, and you still have to lift things up, but they're not over your head, and there's not as much juggling and cleanup.
Yeah, so Derek, what made you choose the Grainfather?
Yeah, so as a lot of propane users can attest, having to swap out canisters all the time can be a major drag, especially if you realize you've forgotten to do it for far too long, and in the middle of a brew, you've suddenly run out of fuel, and you have to make a quick scramble to go fill it back up again.
My notes here also say something about a precocious 4-year-old.
Yeah, so the two big things for me was I recently got solar installed. I'm looking in my life to get as many things electrical as I can. The second thing is the Grainfather has a lot of really great automation features. Basically, in the app, I schedule all the different mass rests. I put the water in, I put the grain in, I hit start. Every once in a while, it beeps at me, letting me know that it's starting the next thing, and then I can go, run after my 4-year-old. So it's really great. I don't have to babysit it. My old system, I basically had to babysit it for 6 hours straight. This one, the active time is maybe like 2 hours, so that's an additional 4 hours in my life that I got back every time I want to brew.
Well, hang on. We're not done. Why don't you put up the... We're switching the camera around. Give me 1 sec. There we go.
Quick question. Can you program it to wake up in the morning and set up your water, and you wake up at 7 and it's already heated and ready to go?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't done that. To be honest, I've only used it a couple times at this point, so I'm not fully expert. Maybe Kurt has used it more and can speak to that. But
so yes, you can do that. I've used mine a bunch of times. I know what you said about your system, and that there's a lot of getting used to. I'm still getting used to it, but the automation is really nice at all stages. But yes, you can set up your water the night before, wake up in the morning, your mash water's ready to go.
So Derek, why don't you show us on your Grainfather there? What are some of the things that you really like about it? What are some of the things that you've had issues in you wish were improved?
Yeah, so the nice thing is, it's all relatively self-contained. I mean, the whole thing just collapses down into this size right here. It's really light. One of the reasons I volunteered to bring it tonight is that I could schlep it in here, and it was really no problem at all. When empty, especially like if you take all the individual pieces out, it only weighs, maybe a dozen pounds. It's really light, especially if if you have trouble lifting things. It's great because it's so light. It's kind of a fancy brew in a bag system, and it's all kind of self-contained. Comes with this little handle here. You can just kind of like lift it out, and there's little ridges right here up. When you need a sparge, you literally just kind of pull it out and then like turn it 15 degrees. It's all really self-contained. It's all really light. It's all pretty hands-off. The biggest challenge that I have is that I'm still finding that right grain crush. I hadn't adjusted my mill from my previous system, which I had it like relatively fine. And I found that I kept getting, not exactly a stuck sparge, but it was like an incredibly slow sparge. And I think it caused issues. The bottom of it is prone to scorching if there's not enough flow. And so I think it was draining too slow, and there wasn't enough flow kind of recirculating through it, and so I'd get these really bad scorches on the bottom. I don't think that it ultimately caused an off flavor. Maybe just in my mind, because I know I was worried about it, but...
Yeah, you noticed it, so it's a point that you're going to...
Right. Everyone else who's tried the beer I've made on it never mentioned anything like that. But it was a big pain in the butt to clean the scorching off of it every time. So the biggest drawback in my mind is that it is prone to scorching on the bottom. If you're not, while it's heating up and there's not enough flow, you kind of have to stir it. But if it's not lautering well enough, you don't get that flow enough, and it'll scorch.
So you both have the 220 versions, right? Yeah, so I'd be curious, does anybody else have Grainfathers out there? I know we've got, a significant amount of you. So how many of you have the 110 versions? So in terms of heating for that, does it seem to take any longer? I guess if you don't have a 220, maybe there's not a point of comparison, but compared to propane, it takes a lot longer. Yeah, Lauren? So Lauren was mentioning that if it's a cool day outside that you may need to insulate it. Is there an insulated jacket that comes with, or that is a separate purchase?
You can buy a jacket.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll talk about when we get to the BrewZilla also. Same thing, you may need to insulate it to do it. Lauren?
Speaking of time, we had a question from Zoomer asking us, well, how quick is quick? And so from the brew that you our Polynesian holiday that you tasted, that was a little less than 4 hours from starting the stove to heat the water when the grain bag was in the water to bring it up to temperature. Less than 4 hours until we had oxygenated in the fermentation vessel and pitched the yeast. So it was 350 that particular brew day.
Yeah. When I did the microphone is falling off my head. So when I did the no boil, that was That was insanely quick. I think it was like 2 hours maybe. So, but that's also cutting out a huge amount of steps. So that's a little unique. So what about Kurt? What's your typical brew day?
So I didn't think that it was legitimate to call this a quick brew, so instead I made a quick ferment. So you guys are drinking a couple of Fike pale ales that were brewed which were fermented at 85 degrees. So that was my quick part. So to answer the question, this is not quick brewing, but it's quick cleanup, quick prep, and not having to pay attention to your temperature all throughout everything. Everything's being controlled. There's recirculation to keep the temperature even. It's not perfect, like every system, but you can pretty much ignore things in between the transitions, and it tells you when you have to run. I have to run downstairs to my garage and go add a hop addition, et cetera, et cetera. So it still takes me probably, I think the other day it was 6 hours from the minute I walked down to the garage and put my mash water in and got everything going. The heat up, I don't think, is significantly slower than when I was doing propane with my 220 system that I have for the G40. And I don't know if that system's more powerful than this or not. It's undoubtedly more powerful because it has larger capacity and there's a larger surface area being heated. But yeah, I think it took me 6 hours, including cleanup, getting everything chilled into the fermenter, et cetera, pitching my yeast. You know, for me, it's really quick because with my 3-tier system, it was a much more of a project. Cleanup was much more of a project, and wear and tear on the body was significant. So I had to go take a nap.
Yeah, and Kurt brings up a good point where it's the brewing process isn't necessarily sped up. I mean, you're still going to have to you're still going to have to mash. It's still going to be an hour boil at least. But part of what quick brewing entails is taking the whole brewing time, the cleanup, the prep, and all that, and having something that helps compress that down. Patrick. So, Kurt, what's your chilling process? Or Derek, you're standing right in front of it. He's getting the visual aid so that we can see.
Yeah, so it uses a counterflow chiller. Usually what I do is I'll run it with tap water until it gets down to about 140 degrees, and then I'll switch to an ice bath that I recirculate via a pump, and then just pump that directly into my fermenter, and that gets me to 70-ish degrees into the carboy. I would say it's about twice as fast as my original setup that I used as a plate with a plate chiller. I haven't tried it with a lager yet, which of course you want to start at a much lower temperature, but for ales, it's about twice as fast.
My experience is similar.
Sean.
Okay, so how much time with the counterflow? Because I actually have a counterflow for my Grainfather. I don't use it just for the cleanliness. I like immersion chillers. But how much time does that take when you're doing that?
So Sean's question is, how much time does the counterflow chiller take?
Maybe 10 minutes. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing about all of this setup is that I start a thing and then I kind of walk away for a while. So it's sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 5 minutes. It's really whenever I get back to it.
What do you guys do to heat your sparge water?
To heat it?
Sparge water.
I don't. With the Grainfather. And that's one of the quick aspects of it for me is that I just use room temperature water. Yeah, one of One of the little experiments I wanted to try with this setup is, because there's not a great way to heat up sparge water within the system itself, is what happens if I just use room temperature water? And the answer for me was that there was no discernible difference in terms of gravity, in terms of flavor, in terms of you name it.
Yeah, so just to jump ahead real quick, since the question's been asked, that's my BrewZilla over there. So for sparge water, what I do is I heat up the total volume of water that I need. I then pump off the sparge water into basically into a pot that sits in a cooler. So that keeps it at relatively the temperature that it needs to be. And then right before I need it, I kick it on a propane stove just to bring it up to the final temp. So that's another way to do that. If you have the volume and you're heating up water anyway, it's going to take a little bit longer, but at least you can do it at the same time.
I've sort of done all of the above at different times, but I have done this thing of saving water. If you're mashing out, if your water's a little bit low in temperature, not a big deal, I don't think. And then in addition, you can always just be bringing up your boil as you're sparging, so you're getting your initial mash out temperature is doing some of the heat effect of inactivating enzymes and stuff. Your sparge water, let's say it's down to 140 or something because it's been sitting around. I don't think it makes a huge difference.
All right, I think Louis got a question, and then we got to wrap up the Grainfather stuff and move on. Oh, well, yeah. Go ahead, Chuck. Louis? I'll repeat the question because we're running low on time. So the question is, are you able to do a full volume boil on this?
If I'm doing 5 gallons in my system, absolutely no problem. I generally will do, sometimes I do, like this last time I did 7.5 gallons. That works fine. I can do a full mash. If I want more, I put more grain and then dilute out afterwards because I think it's too much volume for the system.
Derek?
So I do 5-gallon finished batches, which means I do 5.5 gallons into my fermenter. What I've discovered is that in my previous system, I had maybe an inch to an inch and a half, or a half an inch to an inch of trub at the bottom. But with the Grainfather, I have maybe a 1/4 inch. So even though I'm getting 5.5 gallons into the fermenter, I'm getting actually more finished beer out of it, and it's enough after yeast and flocculation and all that stuff to get an entirely full keg of finished beer, no problem.
All right, so last question for you guys, and if you can answer it quickly, that'd be great. If you had to purchase this again, is this something that you would do, or is there something else that you wish was changed on this?
There are a few things I've had problems with, and I mostly have done workarounds, and those are mostly issues having to do with grain getting into the boil, and I have countered that by just using a real brew in the bag. So I line my mash tun with a bag. And then you can tweak some things. There's various little tweaks you can do. I haven't found it to be a big problem since then, but if you're getting too much, sort of too fine a grain, and you're getting a lot of flour into your pump, and the pump is getting sluggish, you can use both the bag and just make sure everything stays really tight in the bottom. The filter panel in the bottom, it doesn't sit real well, and you've got to tweak it to make it do it well. Let me just mention a couple things about my beer before we end.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
And that is that Andre really wanted a beer to serve with this part of the talk, and no one was really coming up with one at the time. And I said, okay, I'll brew a beer. And I brewed these two Kvike beers in 5 days. I brewed them on Friday. And you're drinking them on Wednesday. They're fully carbonated. I don't know how carbonated they are when you're getting them. I think they definitely need some time, and there are some issues with it. I don't love the beer personally. but it worked and it's fast. And that, like I said, that was the fast part of my brewing
That was the quick
experience.
part.
And I'll let.
All right, so Derek, would you buy yours again?
Yeah, I think it's great. It satisfied all my goals. A lot of the issues I've had have come down to me just learning how to operate it appropriately. The big thing for me is that it's set and forget, really. I come up with my mash schedule, add everything, hit a button, and then I can walk away for a while. And with the 220 version, it heats up really fast. Yeah, a lot of it comes down to operator error if there's an issue. So.
Yeah, and there's a learning curve with all these. Chuck?
Yeah, it weighs a fair amount, but you've got a handle, and it's at this level, so and it's just one quick, you know, and it works. Chris, what were you going to say about the pump? And I'll repeat it if you need to.
So the pump on the Grainfather has a little ball that prevents it from spraying if you forget to leave the valve open. Yeah, if you remove that ball, you get a lot more flow of the pump, like 3x. That really hampers it. So that helps a lot if you get that out. If you're still having problems after that, then I'm not sure. But that's something most people do right away. They have to include it for safety, but that helps a lot. Also, another little tip, make sure on at least the old school Grainfathers have a reset button underneath. And if that trips while you're brewing, you're kind of screwed. So it's good to either have it on like a little furniture dolly or some blocks, some way you can reach under there and reset it if you need to without lifting a full pot of hot wort.
You can also sous vide meat with your Grainfather. It works really well, and it's big enough for ribs and everything. Next year, I think the turkey's happening in it, so stay tuned.
That's actually a really good idea. I never considered before.
One comment, I made all of the beers you tasted, the Schwartz beer 2 months ago, the Italian Pilsner, the grape ales, etc. All were fermented in these fast ferments. Yes, they're plastic. Yes, they get scratched up. No, I've never had a contamination issue from that. Clean them well when you use them. They work.
All right, so let's get the BrewZilla guys up here. So that's me. Let's get Rich. And then we've also got Jay on Zoom, so he will chime in when he's got some stuff to add. So let's get 2 beers going around that I brewed on my BrewZilla, which is the one that's sitting on the table there. We've got a beer called Racantha Wheat, which is an American wheat ale, and then Blonde Ractigino, which is a rebrew of the coffee and cream ale that I did with the Heliawort, and this is a from scratch version of that. So let's talk about some of the specifications and features of the BrewZilla. So the BrewZilla, slightly larger capacity than the Grainfather, 9.25. Now, there may be some specsmanship in some of these features that are up here. You know, each one is trying to say they're a little better than the other. So take some of these with a grain of salt. Same thing with the Grainfather, you know. You got to verify some of this on your own. Stainless steel body, magnetic drive pump, perforated malt pipe. Instead of the counterflow chiller that the Grainfather comes with, this comes with an immersion chiller. So might be an upgrade path to do a counterflow if you're interested in that. Just like the Grainfather, there are optional distilling attachments that you could get. They clip on the top and you're able to distill with it. And just like the Grainfather, there's 110 volt or 220 volt options. I have the 110. Rich has the 220. I believe Jay has the 220 also. I do notice that boils do take a little bit. I did not bring the neoprene jacket that I purchased for this, but like Lauren was saying with the Grainfather, as you're boiling, you need to insulate it a little bit, and that helps a lot. So you just have to remember to take the jacket off while you're trying to chill. Otherwise, you're not helping in that regard. Either one is fine. They're both, yeah. Yeah, the other one's in the 1 gallon. So, as with the Grainfather, there's multiple versions of the BrewZilla. The Gen 4, which is the one that I have right there, that's the newest one. You can still find the Gen 311s available. I know that More Beer had them on reduced, not necessarily clearance, but at a reduced price. So they did make some improvements between the two, so you got to kind of decide if you can live with some of the features that have been improved if you want to save a few bucks. So one of the big things is that they redesigned and relocated the control panel. The one on the left there in the picture, that is the 311. As you can see, the control panel is at the very bottom of it. So if you have it on the ground or something low, you're going to have to get down to be able to do any adjustments on it. The Gen 4 also allows you to use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So they moved the controller up to the top and they redesigned the controller completely. So you can connect up to it with your phone, either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. You can set schedules, you can turn the pumps on and off. It does some nice graphs and charts for you. They changed the way that the pump pickup works. In the Gen 3s, the pump pickup was from the side. The Gen 4 has it dead center in the bottom. Which is a big improvement from what I've heard from Gen 3 users. A larger stock malt pipe, so the malt pipe that comes with it is larger in the Gen 4. They also have expandability with it, where if you want to brew a really big beer and have a really high grain bill, you can add a malt pipe extension to it, which will not only extend the malt pipe, but extend the volume that you can hold for getting your boil. There's some latches on the side here. Most people think these latches are for clipping the glass hood down. If you do that, you'll shatter the hood. What these clips are here for is to attach that malt pipe extension if you want it. There also was an overflow tube that they had in the middle, which was to help prevent, when you're mashing, ending up with a situation where you've pumped all the liquid out and it's now sitting because it hasn't trickled back down through your bed. There was an overflow pipe in the center. The problem with that overflow pipe is it got clogged really easily, so they changed that. The trick with the 4 is you just dial your pump down so you're not pumping as much liquid, so it takes some adjustment on it. And the big difference is the cost. So the Gen 3 right now, because you can still find them at a discount, they're about $450. The Gen 4 at More Beer starts around $600. So we still got my beers going around. So why don't we talk about the first one, which I believe was the... Okay, so that is the Blonde Ractigino. So as I mentioned before, that is a rebrew of the Helia beer that we did for the fundraiser earlier this year. So I took the recipe that Helia had, tried to replicate it as best I could. I took, it was a little over 3 ounces of whole coffee beans. I soaked in some of our SBE whiskey that we did, and then also some chocolate whiskey that I was given as a gift. Did that, basically made my own extract, and then all that got pitched in after fermentation was complete. And it sat there for a while, and then I went ahead and kegged it. This is like whole bean, yeah. So I read a bunch of different things on whether it's whole bean, whether you use ground beans, whether you use, I know that Sean likes to use cold brew. Some people will actually brew coffee and do it. So based on the coffee flavor that I wanted, I figured that using whole bean got me the good aroma and a little bit of flavor, but nothing that really detracts from the rest of it. So. Yes, there is actually one in one of the other kits. Rich, just unscrew the topping for it. This is now the second time that hasn't worked. Yeah. Trying to get too fancy and just complicating things. Yeah, Yeah, I guess we got to wait because the other beer hasn't gone around, so I can't talk about it just yet. So why don't let me press some buttons in the back, and then we'll start talking about some of the features of the BrewZilla. All right, so one of the reasons that I picked the BrewZilla, I went back and forth between the Grainfather and the BrewZilla, and one of the reasons that I picked on this one, some of the features on the Grainfather that I think were adding to the cost weren't things that I necessarily needed, so this kind of fit better for me. I liked the fact that the new one, with the new control layout, I was also going back and forth between the 3 to try and save a few bucks, but I picked the 4 because the control pad's in a much better location. There is also an extension that you can get, so if you wanted to mount this on the wall next to it, you could do that, and that's, I think, going to be the next upgrade that I get. But just like the Grainfather, so inside of here, there is a malt pipe, which sits on some feet here, so when you're doing your sparge, you're able to drain everything out. It's also got a second set of feet about midway, so what you can do is you can lift it up. There's a bar that goes across here just like the Grainfather, so you got something to lift from. You can do it about halfway, let a lot of the liquid drain out, and then do it the rest of the way, so you're not trying to haul this big heavy thing with both water and wet grain up the whole way. So there's also a false bottom here that you're able to clean. Inside here, one of the additions that I did to this is there is actually a heat spreader that I got that sits on the bottom. One of the downsides of this is the pump pickup is in the bottom, but the temperature sensor also is. So if you don't have enough flow around it, you're not getting an accurate temperature. You have gradation going from the bottom to the top. A lot of times if you leave the pump on, you can smooth some of that out. But this heat diffuser plate causes the flow of work to end up around and be directed more towards where the probe is. So you're not getting some hot spots. But this was an additional cost. So it's something you have to add. Just like the neoprene jacket, that was an additional cost. So you can very easily start out with a basic system and it can kind of go from there. So so it looks like Rich has the other beer probe. Rich, why don't you come up and let's talk about the BrewZilla stuff. I want to know some of your experiences on it. So as I mentioned before, I've got the 110 version. Rich has the 220. So what drew you to the BrewZilla as opposed to the Grainfather? Or other methods like this?
Sure. So for me, it was similar to what was said previously. I was brewing on a 3-vessel system. And it's... The main aspects of that is really like setup and tear down. So most of my stuff on my 3-vessel system is TC tri-clamp. So I've got valves, ball valves, and I had a wonderful brewing partner, and then COVID happened, and it's my son. And so weren't really able to brew, and I was kind of getting frustrated. And I talked to Raul actually at Carlsbad Brew Supply, and he said, "Oh, why don't you come by?" He goes, "I use one of these things to brew," so I went over there and watched him brew with it. So I have the larger version. I have the 60-liter, 220-volt, 3.1. So it doesn't have the this nice new system here. That's one of the things I don't like about it, is that the controls are all at the bottom. There's a bit of up and down. And, I thought, well, I want to keep brewing. So, and I did brew a couple times by myself on the big system. And I think what Kurt said was, being ruined the next day was kind of like the way it worked out. So that was mainly it. And then I thought it would also give some flexibility. And now I'm actually seeing that I'm planning to make some upgrades to my original system and actually use, so the hot liquor tank I had was actually just a kegel. And so if I do use it, if I do use my 3-vessel brewing system before, again, I will be using the BrewZilla as the hot liquor tank.
Can you get someone to pour your beer also, and then and pop back up here? So one of the things that in talking to Rich just before the meeting started, one of the differences that we found out that wasn't well documented between the 3 and the 4 is there's a pump in the bottom. The pump allows you to pump up to this output here, which the Gen 3 has. But on the Gen 4, I've also got a spigot down at the bottom that is also the output of the pump. So depending on which valves I've got open, I can either be pumping through here or I can be pumping out of here. So when it's time to go from this into my carboy, what I can do is I can run a long silicone hose from that and pump straight from the bottom. Rich just started to pump into his from here, which is definitely a way to do it. But you know, it's another improvement that they made between the two different versions. Based on what you've got, you said you were going to, there are some improvements that you wanted to make. All in all, I mean, what's your experience with this? Is it something that is, something that you'd recommend to others? I know you have a 3. Is that still a viable option if you can get your hands on one? Or are the differences between the 3 and the 4?
I think I would probably actually stick with the 3.
Okay.
Just from what I've heard, it's not that there's. I think the 4 is a definite improvement, but like you mentioned, the heat shield, it's a center drain. I don't know. I'm not sure if I would buy the same system again at this point, but I think what it did do for me was it helped me keep brewing, and a lot of the brews came out well. There were issues though, like I think you've heard from us, Lewis and I before, getting a consistent mash temperature through it. Because your malt tubes here, and then you have this thin layer of liquid, that's on the side of the tube. And I think there are some issues with moving that, the heated, even though you have heated water going through the top, it's like it'd be nice if there was a way for them to actually move the liquid around the side. I think it would. Stabilize the mash temperature much faster. So that's what I found is like getting the mash temperature stabilized takes a while.
Yeah, so one of the things that the 4 has, because it's got an integrated controller with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, they do sell, a Bluetooth thermometer that you can pitch in the top. And it'll basically do an average of the temperatures between the two, because as I mentioned before, you've got some gradation in here, so you're going to have some inconsistent temperatures. Even if you're running the pump to keep things going, it's going to take a while before everything comes to the same temperature, especially if the burner keeps coming on and off to try and maintain. So, but that's another add-on. I'm sure the Grainfather has something similar. I know that Wrapped is the name of the control software or something used, but they've got things like they've got some fermentation like the tilts and things like that all work in that environment that they've got. So all right, so we already talked about go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other thing that I just did was I replaced this tube with a polycarbonate sight glass. And I just used that, and I thought, wow, this is great, because even though it's got the markings on the side, you're sort of like using a flashlight trying to look down to see how much you've got, and that's actually been nice.
And especially once you've pulled the malt pipe up and you're draining, right? You want to figure out what your volume of liquid is before you start, and you can't see that because you've got the malt pipe sitting right on top. That sight glass is not something they offer for the 4. They only offer it for the 3. Now, I don't know if they're going to offer it for the 4. It's an upgrade, and like again with the Grainfather, with this, it's a system, and once you get into the system, you're going to be adding components, and you're going to find out that what you have you can do better with something else, and an entry level $450 system can easily end up $1,000 once you've added all the bells and whistles to it. So keep that in mind when we're talking about these. That if you're not careful, you could go to the extremes on some of this stuff.
Oh.
So.
And maybe this isn't the right time, but one other aspect is, and I'm pretty sure you can do this with bowl systems, is you can distill on these.
Yes, yeah.
So again, it's more equipment to put on top and stuff, but you can do that, and I don't know that you could easily do that with just your regular 3-vessel system or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So why don't you tell us about your beer that went around?
Oh, okay. So, I'm not sure I would call this a quick brew, but I brewed it on this type of system. And, a while back we had a bunch of Lallemand yeast going around. And I was really impressed with the Nova Lager in my hands. I just thought that the beers that I made with it, first starting out with the Big Brew, came out really well, and I presented some of those, and so I decided to do a different kind of lager, and I was looking around for something different, so I chose a Czech amber lager. Now, one thing I didn't do with this lager was I didn't do any decoction, so I suppose it's kind of a pseudo-Czech amber lager. But I did do the fermentation kind of low and slow, so I did not do pressure. I just let it, I pitched at 50. In fact, what I've done for the last 2 lagers that I've done is, getting that temperature down can take so long. So I've gotten it down to, say like 70 to 80, and then put it in the fermenter, stick it in my fermentation chamber, and then I've pitched it in the morning. And both of them have turned out fine that way. So I kind of liked it. It's a little residual sweetness in there, I think, but I wanted to do something amber for the holidays, and that was the inspiration.
Cool, thanks, Rich. And so the second beer that went around of mine, the Racantha Wheat. So that's basically just an American wheat ale. Really basic, really simple. Nothing too fancy with that. One note on the coffee beer that went around, the Blonde Rock Gino, that finished at like 7.2%. It finished out at 10:03. Yeah, it went crazy. I have no idea why it went as quick as it did and as long as it did. But I think it turned out really well, so I lost my pointer. So that one I used White Labs Cream Ale, which is what I used with the Helia one. So I don't quite know why it ended up the way it did, but I think it worked out. So anything else? I forgot about the pictures, so let's just let these go for a minute or two. So anything else you want to mention about the BrewZilla, Rich?
No, I wanted to contribute this just so you could see, like, this is this is the 3-vessel system, although not that little pot. But, this is a 25-gallon mash tun, a 20-gallon infusion. And I love to do split batches. I hate to do a single beer at a time. And this is in the BrewZilla at the end, after and showing you some of the crud on the bottom. So when you pull that false bottom out, there is then also another layer of precipitation on the bottom. I'm interested to see how this one that I just did, which is a porter, just a straight up English porter, where I just decided to pump it out. I was like, okay, let's just pump it out. So I've been running it from here, but the 3.1 doesn't have the pump connected to here. It's just totally gravity. So the only other thing I would say is somebody else mentioned lifting it. And lifting the malt tube on the big guy, if I'm doing a double batch, is a big deal. So I did get a pulley, and I used the pulley to pull up the grain basket. And I think that what I do is, instead of having to pull it up all the way at once, I pull it up partially so that the mash drains out a little slower, and that the grain bed doesn't compact as quickly. Yeah. The other thing I do, and I picked this tip up from Raul, he said, use rice hulls in almost any beer you do with this. He said it helps with the recirculation and keeping the mash bed from compacting. Yeah.
Have you found with your grind that you need to do any finer grind than you have before? Because I've read, and I haven't had a chance to experiment yet, but I've read both things, that either you want a coarser grind or a finer grind, and there seemed to not be a consensus on that.
Still learning. Yeah.
Okay. So does anybody else out there have a BrewZilla, or it was also known as Robo Brew at one point, so anybody, or are we three the only ones? Oh, Sean's got his hand up. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if Jay's on Skype, but Jay, do you have anything you'd like to add? We got your pictures going right now. So.
Okay. What made me choose a BrewZilla? Well, I had a system for about 25 years that included a GOT chiller as my mash tun, a 10-gallon one, and it finally completely died. Like I could push my fingers through the plastic. It was dead. I had to do something. So in my current house, it couldn't be too big. So I couldn't do like a 15-gallon Sabco system, or it had to be stored in a closet. And then electric would be better, because I hate filling, just like it's been mentioned before, propane tanks. And I have rooftop solar with plenty of extra power. I wanted something between 5 and 10 gallons. I was doing 10 gallons before. And I needed it to be portable to the outside and storable in a closet. So that was the main, one of the main things. I should also mention I'm retaining my old 10-gallon system minus the mash tun, so I can still do crazy stuff if I need to. Second question was, what are some of the pros? And the first one was storage size. I mean, it really is tiny for what you get. The other thing was, I was thinking that BrewZilla is selling a lot more than the other ones. I'm pretty sure. And so that means spare parts will be available for a very long time. I saw a project, referencing John here, that someone hooked up a Raspberry Pi to a dead BrewZilla and made it work. So it should be upgradable. And then it's a pretty easy brew day compared to my old system, just like I've heard other comments here. Doing 12-gallon systems on a, batches on a 3-tier system is a lot of work. I mean, you're talking, for me, usually at least an 8-hour brew day and a lot of heavy lifting. So I was looking for something that would reduce that. And then recipe-wise, after tests, I haven't found really any limitations to what grains work and which do not. I've done 50% wheat and rye beers, stouts, pale ales, browns, IPAs, lots of kveeks, which have all come out really well. If your pH is good, everything seems to convert fine. And I think that's one of the keys, that your grind and your pH have to be more on spot with these systems than your normal 3-tier systems. And then being popular, a lot of accessories are available. Like you mentioned, there's the extra capacity malt pipe and extension that you can do to do 10-gallon batches. Next question was, what are some of the issues that you've had? And for a few recipes, I've ended up with true baked onto the bottom mash screen, which starts to seal it. It makes the boil really violent. It adds to scorching, it seems, and it might be related to poor grind or conversion. So those, I think in these systems, you're, monitoring your pH, monitoring your, conversion is more important. Let's see, grind is much more sensitive than my old system. I end up adjusting it a lot more for each grain that I'm doing. You have to use rice hulls, as it's been mentioned, which is, it adds to the volume of your mash. It reduces the total amount of grains that you can put in there. And one of the big things is don't try to use too much grain. I tried a 16-pound batch, and it really did not go well. It was ground really, really very, very perfectly, I think, with enough rice hulls, but I got completely stuck on that. The specs say that you can use a lot more than that, and I don't think that's true. I'm wondering if anyone else has done more than 16 pounds in this, in a 3.1.1, normal 9.25 gallon system. The other thing I noticed is that it really likes to scorch. LME, DME, sugar additions, molasses additions, way more than my old system. There are some really hot spots in there. My old one had was a big, like a 14-gallon pot with a very thick stainless steel bottom that I would hardly ever get scorches on. And then this is an interesting one. I used to start with really thick mash for better conversion. So in the BrewZilla, the water-grain ratio is way higher than I was using. I typically start at 1 quart per pound before. And after this, you're talking about 1.7 to 2.0 quarts per pound, which is standard in industry. But I noticed that I had to mash a lot, an extra half hour basically instead of an hour to get full conversion. And then of course, if you're going to sparge, you'll need, if you want hot water. I've been just cheating and using normal tap water over the top of the grain bed, and it seems to work fine, just like someone else mentioned. I bought the replacement clear plastic tube that runs from the bottom of the unit up to the side of the pump. It broke pretty quickly, actually under heat stress. And I replaced it with the original stainless steel one, and it's bought a pipe insulator for that, and it seems to be working fine. My efficiency went down from my original system, and I just compensate by adding an extra half pound of grain or so. And I have had problems with blocked pumps, especially with that extra trube that seems to be, for me, it seems like I get extra trube in there. I don't get a lot of the hot break that I used to. The fourth question was, are any complaints or things that you wish were different? And I have no complaints really so far other than those that I mentioned. And if I had to purchase it again, I probably would.
Cool. Thank you, Jay. So probably about 6 months ago, I think, Jay, somebody was asking about the BrewZilla, and you wrote up a nice long email of basically all of the features and all of the quirks and all of the issues. So if you're interested in a BrewZilla specifically, try and look back through your email and find that. There was a lot of good information there. So thank you, Jay.
Absolutely. And feel free to email me directly if anyone has any questions. Let's see, I bought mine in around February or March and started to use it there. So I haven't had, I've had less than a year of experience with it. But brewing most weeks, it's a lot easier to use than my old system.
And that seems to be consensus on a lot of these. So cool. Thank you, Jay. So we're running low on time, so I'm going to blow through this comparison summary because we pretty much talked about most of this stuff. So extract brewing, tried and true, minimal equipment. You still need a method to chill, so you got to figure that out. As Lauren mentioned, limited recipe formulation. There's just not a lot out there. But you do get predictable results, so it should be fairly consistent for you. You're not going to end up with a stuck mash because you're not doing a mash. And extremely low cost. It's essentially, a couple pots and the cost of ingredients. So BrewZilla. And some of these go for both BrewZilla and Grainfather. New technology. You might need additional hardware. The Grainfather does seem to be more complete out of the box than the BrewZilla, but that may also explain some of the price difference. The BrewZilla has an included immersion chiller. The Grainfather has an included counterflow chiller. Definitely a big upgrade on that. With both of them, if you can get it to fit in the malt pipe, you can use it. So you're not limited to any sort of grains or any sort of unique ingredients. Both of them, it didn't get copied over the next cell, but both of them take some adjustment and some knowledge to get consistent results. So there is a learning curve with both of them. BrewZilla, you can get a stuck mash if you're not careful. Rice hulls, other things slowing your pump down can help with that. The Grainfather, some of those do seem to be alleviated a little bit, but from what Kurt and Derek were saying, that's still a possibility, so be aware of that. With the BrewZilla, entry level, you're looking at $450 to $600. Grainfather, entry level, $700. So there is some difference between there. So that's definitely an item you need to be aware of. So, any final questions? We're running running really low on time, so no questions. Good. Thank you.